Collected Essays of Valerie Lynn Stevens. Truly, what is sanity and what is insanity? Sometimes the ones running the asylum are the true psychopaths. Valerie Lynn Stevens. There are many misguided and indeed harmful ideas floating around out there about the subject of sanity versus insanity. The first and most commonly shared folie à deux, or toi, etc., and this is a true form of insanity, I'll expound later, is that any sign of creativity or display of strong emotion must be a sign of emotional or mental instability, and indeed even turpitude. I personally have always found this to be an ironic notion, considering the fact that artistic expression in and of itself is a direct and indirect sublimative outlet for staving off that very thing. Namely, I was always a highly creative and intellectually inclined person, mainly due to the fact that I was trying to preserve my so-called sanity in the very face of evils in this world which truly deserve such an assignation. Another thing I notice is how certain behaviors and personality and or character traits or qualities which society glorifies and accepts in children become pathologized and even demonized in adults. For example, let's say there's a child carrying on an animated conversation with another person and or persons whom we might not be able to see, but that child interacts with them as if they're there, in both an emotional sense and in a physical sense. Then we say, oh, how nice, they have an imaginary friend. And that's that. It is accepted as normal and even a kind of milestone of childhood even, and we move on and let them be. However, imagine that this person in the above scenario is a quote-unquote adult person, carrying on an animated conversation with someone they may sense, but that we cannot. Then too often that person is either assumed to be crazy, dangerous, or, quote, retarded, or challenged in some way, or all the above, and in most cases is treated in such a derogatory, demoralizing, condescending, and hurtful manner. Yet most people who commit acts of violence, be they physical, sexual, or of the more insidious, covert, and psychological emotional variation, fail to properly engage in more constructive and or creative outlets for their inner tensions and anxieties, and choose to instead use others as identified patients and scapegoats for their own projected evils. After all, how many artists and intellectuals can truly be said to be crazy when these are, in most cases, some of the most conscientious and tough-minded individuals we will ever meet? Not to mention the most interesting, genuine, and empathetic. And brilliant, I would add. Highly lucid. Furthermore, there is another misconception concerning sanity versus insanity, and who's who and what's what. In law, they use a term called the insanity defense in some criminal cases to determine whether or not an individual can be legally held accountable for their own actions. Then there is something termed moral insanity, which, while not a purely legalistic term and definition, is rather a philosophical one. In fact, the denotative definition of moral insanity allows for certain sinister character qualities to be present in an individual without the accompanying intellectual impairments, as is assumed in the insanity defense. The earliest usage of this term, moral insanity, was in a treatise written by James Cowles Pritchard in 1835. Furthermore, the Monotone Rules of 1842 established the distinction between legal insanity and moral insanity, whereby the former required a manifestation of some sort of delusions or affective and or reasoning impairments. In my view, the only true form of insanity is moral insanity, or as we theologians and laymen alike refer to as the original sin, human nature. Personally, although this form of character disorder and deviation may not meet legalistic definitions of true insanity, the deleterious effects inflicted upon its victims is nevertheless quite maddening. Thus, without dispensing of the term moral insanity, let's just assume this form of madness to be, albeit in a league of its own, nevertheless a mark of a very disordered, disturbed, and diseased mind indeed. Moreover, these individuals whom we would deem today as suffering from personality and character disorders are very much accountable for the untold and long-lasting damage that their abuses and exploitations cause to their victims and survivors. However, the insanity inherently assumed in my designation of true insanity refers mainly to the gross distortions of moral truth and order which this kind of human evil contributes to and even champions. Judeo-Christian scripture refers to this as the lawlessness of sin. 1 John 3:4. Everyone who practices sin also practices lawlessness, and sin is lawlessness. And although these individuals cannot rightfully claim the insanity defense, the confusion, chaos, and senselessness which they contribute to in the world is plain for all to see. Yes, ladies and gents, oftentimes the ones running the asylum are the true lunatics and sociopaths. Now that's truly insane. But we survivors can console ourselves with the fact that the scapegoats are the ones who are set free in the end. And that's justice wrought by the Most High Author and Prince of Peace, and not discord, and perfect order and not chaos. For true sanity is determined not only by the soundness of one's mind, but by the deepest motives of one's heart.